Hello folks, tonight we're gliding into salt-slicked dreams and moonlit waters where seagulls call from nowhere and the sea hums a low lullaby. Imagine drifting on a warm tide, half asleep, half curious, and just as the fog lifts, you glimpse it, a glimmer on the horizon, towers of white stone, canals of red metal, elephants wandering past temples, Atlantis. Or maybe just your imagination being cheeky again. You know, the story of Atlantis is one of those strange little gems that hangs around like that one weird guy at the party who tells a totally absurd story, but with such confidence you actually start Googling halfway through. Tonight, we're following that strange guy all the way home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and the time you're tuning in. I love knowing where you're falling asleep from. Now dim the lights, maybe open the window for that soft wind hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The thing is, Atlantis didn't show up in some obscure scroll from a fringe desert prophet. Nope, it came from Plato, the big guy himself, the ancient Greek philosopher whose name we still toss around like it's part of everyday chat. Oh, that's platonically impossible, or this salad is an ideal form. But 2,400 years ago, Plato sat down and told a story that has haunted thinkers, treasure hunters, and Reddit forums ever since. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato described a place far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, a powerful and glorious island civilization that supposedly existed 9,000 years before his time, which, if you do the sleepy math, plops Atlantis around 11,000 years ago. You know, just when the last ice age was ending, the oceans were rising, and humanity was trying to remember how to grow kale again. Atlantis was no tiny fishing village either. Plato's tale is pretty extra. Gigantic rings of land and sea, sophisticated technology, glorious temples with walls coated in orichalcum, basically ancient bling, and a navy powerful enough to conquer the world, or at least threaten Athens before being wiped out in a single day and night of misfortune. Floods, quakes, the whole nature went bananas package. But here's the thing that makes some historians roll their eyes like tired parents at a kid's ghost story. Plato says the whole tale came from his ancestor, Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests during a trip to Sai. They, in turn, read it off a mysterious stone tablet written thousands of years earlier. It's like one long historical game of telephone with hieroglyphics. Plato never even finished the Critias dialogue. It literally breaks off mid-sentence. Cliffhanger, anyone? Now, mainstream historians mostly categorize the Atlantis story as allegory, a made-up moral tale about hubris and the ideal state, like a bedtime story for baby democracies. In that light, Atlantis is less a GPS pin and more of a cautionary glitter bomb. Here's what happens when you get too rich, too proud, and too into shiny stuff. But still, the timing of the tale, the details of the destruction, and the fact that Plato insisted it was true, even calling those who doubted it lazy thinkers, makes a certain type of curious brain sit up a little straighter. Was Plato just flexing his storytelling muscles, or was he referencing something his contemporaries already whispered about? And here's your first little quirky tidbit. In the 1800s, a man named Ignatius Donnelly, part politician, part eccentric ink spiller, wrote Atlantis, the antediluvian world, which basically jump-started modern Atlantis obsession. He claimed Atlantis was the root of all civilization, the proto-nation from which Egyptian, Greek, and even Mesoamerican cultures descended. Spoiler, experts were not amused. But Donnelly did what YouTubers now dream of. He got people talking, arguing, investigating. Even today, you've got satellite sleuths poring over ocean floor ridges, scuba divers exploring sunken temples off the coasts of India and Japan, and yes, even TikTok historians confidently declaring they found Atlantis, FRFR, no cap. Atlantis refuses to vanish like that one weird dream that always ends with water and ruins and the sense that you just missed something. And while Atlantis has certainly drawn in the crystal wavers and alien truthers, we'll get there, don't worry, serious scientists, geologists, archaeologists, even marine biologists have occasionally raised one skeptical eyebrow, and then quietly the other. After all, Earth's sea levels have changed dramatically. Ancient coastlines are now hundreds of feet underwater. And our earliest maps don't exactly have a stellar Yelp rating for accuracy. So we begin this dream wrapped in fog, staring into a myth that might be more than metaphor, less than fact, and exactly what we need on nights like these. A puzzle, a portal, a what-if that won't go away. As we drift into the next chapter of this ocean-misted fable, keep one thing in mind. Atlantis may not be where, or even what, you expect. But somewhere between bedtime and the bottom of the sea, the story is waiting. And you're already floating toward it. Plato didn't just casually drop Atlantis like a tossed pebble into history. He embedded it in Timaeus and Critias, two dialogues structured like philosophical sleepovers. You know, the kind where your friends stay up too late, sipping honeyed wine, debating the nature of the universe, and one guy says, "Hey, want to hear about a civilization that got absolutely wrecked by the gods?" In Timaeus, Plato sets the scene. The earth is vast and the ocean even vaster. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, there was once a mighty island larger than Libya and Asia combined. It was a hub of trade, riches, and knowledge. The Atlanteans weren't just into spa days and gold statues, they were technologically and spiritually advanced, until, of course, they got a bit too full of themselves. And, bam, down they went in a single day and night of misfortune, swallowed by the sea. End scene. Now here's where it gets cheeky. Plato insisted the story wasn't his invention. He claimed it came from Solon, one of Athens' wise lawgivers, who got it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. According to them, this wasn't some fresh tale. It was ancient even in their time. The priests told Solon that the Greeks were children, forgetting their own long-forgotten history, while Egypt had preserved the truth. Smooth move, Plato. Use a respected ancestor and a mystical foreign source to add street cred. Smart storytelling move or coded truth. Historians, of course, point out that Plato loved allegory. In the Republic, he crafted a whole imaginary state just to make a philosophical point. So why would Atlantis be different? It could just be his metaphor for a utopia gone bad, a luxurious, imperialistic civilization whose downfall shows why humility beats hubris. Simple, logical, clean. Except it's weirdly specific. Plato doesn't just say they had a cool navy. He describes concentric rings of land and sea, massive walls plated in a reddish-gold metal called orichalcum, which, side note, sounds like a made-up Dungeons & Dragons resource but actually shows up in ancient texts. He talks about temples, racetracks, mountains, hot springs, and an abundance of elephants. Why elephants? Why so many elephants? And then there's the math. The story pegs Atlantis at around 1600 years ago, coincidentally lining up with the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden climate change, massive flooding, and species extinction. Some scientists whisper about global cataclysms, comet impacts, or solar flares triggering widespread collapse. Mainstream academia says correlation isn't causation, but you've got to admit the timing has a theatrical flair. One quirky fact? Some early Christian thinkers took the Atlantis story very seriously. In the Middle Ages, the concept of a drowned civilization morphed into allegories of the Great Flood, tying it into Noah and biblical resets. Atlantis started popping up on early maps like a forgotten cousin, labeled somewhere near the Azores or even Greenland, lurking under cloud swirls and sea monsters. Yet, most modern historians lean toward a specific view. Plato used the Atlantis tale as a tool to explore the perfect state, to critique Athens' growing ambition, or maybe to reflect on the terrifying power of nature. He might have drawn on vague memories of real catastrophes, like the Minoan eruption at Santorini, hold on to that thought for later, but then wrapped them in layers of philosophical frosting. Still, that's not the end of the debate. Far from it. You see, if Plato was inventing things just for moral instruction, he was oddly committed to the bit. In Critias, he begins listing genealogies, rulers, and physical measurements with almost bureaucratic glee. It's like he's trying to submit a planning application for the lost city. Here's the canal length, the depth, the number of docks, and by the way, Poseidon's temple had a roof of ivory and silver. Not your typical bedtime allegories set up. And here's the open debate. Did Plato fabricate Atlantis entirely? Some scholars believe he mixed real tales of ancient disasters with philosophy to make a point. Others think he was pulling from Egyptian flood myths or even earlier oral traditions that predated written history. Maybe Atlantis wasn't a place, but a memory echo, the archaeological PTSD of a species that's been watching shorelines change for millennia. Then there are the believers, the ones who say Plato didn't make a single word up. They argue the Egyptian priests really did preserve ancient knowledge, that Solon did bring the story home, and that Plato, obsessed with truth and balance, shared it because he believed it was truth. That he thought Athens needed the warning. Oh, and you'll love this fringe tidbit. There's a theory, popular on the weirder side of YouTube, that Atlantis wasn't a physical place at all, but a dimensional one. Like a high-frequency civilization that shifted out of sync with our own, leaving only myths and a few suspiciously advanced ruins behind. Don't worry, we'll swirl back into the cosmic soup later on. What's important for now is this. Plato's Atlantis wasn't some one-liner tossed off in a drunken footnote. He spent pages and pages describing it, defending its source, and trying to connect it to actual history. Which means either he was deeply invested in his philosophical cosplay, or he was whispering a deeper truth disguised as a bedtime tale. You're left with a choice. Either it's just the world's oldest political fable, or it's the surviving memory of a civilization so ancient, so far removed from our own, that it's become unrecognizable. A story that's traveled across languages, across time, through temples and catacombs and crumpled scrolls, all the way to your quiet room tonight. And now, as the mist thickens and our boat glides forward, we'll press deeper into the sea's darker folds. Because what if something really is buried down there? What if Plato wasn't alone? Picture this. You're standing ankle-deep in warm, shallow waters on the coast of an Aegean island, toes digging into ancient silt while the sea laps against your skin like it remembers something. A tremor stirs beneath the earth. The birds take off in a silent rush, and then a flash of heat, a roaring plume, and the ocean rushes in like it forgot its manners. Entire cities vanish, lights go out, and a civilization that thought it had forever becomes silence. This isn't science fiction, it's the Bronze Age collapse. A time around 1200 BCE when a web of ancient civilizations, Mycenaeans, Hittites, Egyptians, and Minoans, suddenly unraveled like a toddler pulling at a thread. Trade routes died, palaces burned, scripts were forgotten, and the Mediterranean world hit what we might call the world's first really bad Wi-Fi outage. Mainstream historians say it was probably a perfect storm. Climate shifts, invasions, economic instability, the usual suspects. But nestled inside that collapse, almost like an uninvited guest, sits a volcanic island that might just be the smoking gun behind the Atlantis myth. Thera, or as modern tourists know it, Santorini. Oh yes, the Instagram honeymoon spot with infinity pools and blue domes may have once been Atlantis' funeral pyre. Thera's eruption around 1600 BCE was one of the most catastrophic in human history. We're talking mega tsunami, massive ash fallout, climate disruption for years. Some estimates suggest the blast was 4 times as powerful as Krakatoa. It shattered the island into fragments and sent tidal waves slamming into Crete, the heart of Minoan civilization. And here's your historical fact. The Minoans, known for their labyrinthine palaces, advanced plumbing, and absolutely wild frescoes, were thriving just before this volcanic mic drop. Now for the fun twist. Some archaeologists suggest that what Plato described as Atlantis, concentric rings of land and water, central temples, advanced tech, sounds suspiciously like Akrotiri, a Minoan city preserved in volcanic ash, often called the Pompeii of the Aegean. The city had multi-story buildings, indoor toilets, seriously, detailed art and roads paved better than some modern suburbs. If Plato was echoing a story distorted by centuries of memory, maybe Thera was the real-world disaster that birthed the myth. But that's not the only submerged whisper we've found. Scattered across the globe are ruins that, like faded tattoos on the ocean's skin, suggest we've been missing chapters. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, divers have found structures that may be over 9,000 years old. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans have revealed vast symmetrical shapes that don't quite scream natural formation. And in the Mediterranean itself, there's Pavlopetri, an underwater Greek city over 5,000 years old, complete with streets and courtyards. Underwater cities aren't fictional. They're just inconvenient to the neat timeline we like to tell ourselves. Here's your fringe tidbit for the night. A few geologists and rogue researchers have floated the idea that Earth's crust occasionally slips, dramatically shifting land masses in what they call crustal displacement. Think Earth playing tectonic hopscotch. No solid proof, of course, but it would explain why some ancient maps show ice-free land under Antarctica, or why seabeds in unexpected places reveal ancient artifacts. And this leads us to a very open scholarly debate. Is the sea floor hiding a prehistoric chapter of human civilization we've simply never excavated? Most mainstream scientists point to a lack of direct evidence because, well, underwater archaeology is tough, expensive, and mostly avoided like broccoli by academia unless funding is involved. But what if we're just looking in the wrong places, or not looking at all? Let's circle back for a moment to the Minoan. They were extraordinary. No military walls around their cities. Historians think they were so dominant on the sea they didn't need them. Their art was vibrant, their women held high status, and their engineering, well, they had advanced sewers, not glamorous, but impressive. Some historians even think the mythical labyrinth of the Minotaur was a memory of the vast palace complex at Knossos, so intricate that it might have felt like a maze to the uninitiated.
Now imagine someone centuries later trying to piece together garbled stories of a vanished island, fierce bull imagery, an advanced maritime empire wiped out overnight. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? But there's something else, something eerie.
The more you look at submerged ruins, the more you notice they tend to be coastal, which seems obvious until you remember sea levels were up to 400 feet lower during the last ice age. So what if a whole bunch of civilization, knowledge, and ornate mosaic-tiled bathhouses are just sitting down there, hidden beneath layers of silt and salt? We think we've mapped history, but 70% of the planet is ocean, and we've explored less of it than we have the moon. Let that settle in while you sip your sleepy tea. It's not just Atlantis we've forgotten, it might be an entire epoch, a phase of human culture washed away where stories became myths Myths became bedtime tales, and bedtime tales became tonight's slow, curling dream. The kind where you wake up wondering why your pillow smells like salt water and your ears are still ringing. So as we drift on, let the echoes of Thera's ash and Minoan sewers, of forgotten seawalls and long silent marketplaces swirl behind us like ghost ships. If Atlantis did exist, it may not have been one place but a chorus, a memory of many cities, many peoples, lost not to wrath, but to water. And just maybe it's still out there, not whole, not dry, but waiting. You're floating now, weightless in thought, drifting into the quieter corners of the Atlantic, where the maps grow vague and cartographers once drew dragons. Picture this, it's the age of sail. Wooden ships creak under canvas sails, men scan the waves for trade winds and treasure, and somewhere between ambition and madness, the idea of Atlantis starts to resurface, saltier and stranger than before. It begins with whispers among scholars, but quickly spills into the wild imaginations of explorers. As European empires begin mapping the so-called New World, they bring Plato's myth back into vogue. Except now, it's not just a fable about hubris, it's a potential destination, a place they might find and maybe even conquer. Enter the age of Atlantis speculation. One of the most enduring candidates during this time, the Azores, those remote, rugged islands, bobbing halfway between Europe and America like breadcrumbs across the sea. Portuguese sailors rediscovered them in the 15th century, but myths had already wrapped themselves around the rocks. Legends told of strange artifacts, submerged roads, and sightings of unusual stone structures under the waves. Just the kind of thing that makes a bored admiral scribble, maybe Atlantis, in the margins of a sea log. Then there's the Canary Islands, long believed by some to be the mountain peaks of a sunken continent. Early visitors found ruins, stepped pyramids, and stories passed down by the Guanches, indigenous people with blonde hair, blue eyes, and mysterious origins. One mainstream historical fact? The Guanches were discovered living in isolation, with practices eerily similar to Mediterranean cultures, despite being on an island chain that had supposedly never been connected to Europe. Of course, colonial logic being what it was, this led to some very Eurocentric mental gymnastics. Some historians at the time suggested that the primitive peoples of the Americas had to be survivors of Atlantis, because heaven forbid they developed civilizations on their own. Cue a flood of speculative writing where every mound, pyramid, or overgrown stone wall was Atlantis in disguise, and the theories ballooned like a souffle in a sauna. In the 19th century, American politician and writer Ignatius Donnelly took things to a whole new level. He published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in 1882, and it was an absolute mic drop in the world of pseudo-history. Donnelly claimed Atlantis was the source of all ancient civilizations, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, even Norse. His logic? Too many cultures had pyramids, flood myths, and sky gods for it to be coincidence. Ergo, single mother civilization. Atlantis. Mainstream historians, of course, rolled their eyes so hard they probably saw Plato himself. But Donnelly's book hit a nerve. People were hungry for mystery, for meaning, and for the idea that humanity had once reached great heights, only to fall, a kind of cautionary tale and cosmic hope all at once. One fringe tidbit, Donnelly even argued that Atlantis was the real Garden of Eden, not just a place, but the place where humanity started, flourished, and then fell from grace. Add a little catastrophe and boom, you've got theology, geology, and science fiction all in one spicy stew. And that stew kept simmering. Atlantis popped up in Victorian literature, New Age philosophy, esoteric societies, and eventually theosophy. Think Madame Blavatsky and her followers spinning tales of root races, ascended masters, and Atlantean crystal technology. things went from lost city to we used to have mined lasers. Some of the spiritualists claimed Atlantis had aircraft, energy domes and genetic engineering before it all went belly up. It's the kind of idea that makes you wonder if maybe the aliens were watching us even then, shaking their heads and muttering, "Not again." Which brings us to the open scholarly debate. Did all these explorers and early theorists find fragments of real history, or just project their fantasies onto every strange ruin and coincidental similarity? Some argue the search for Atlantis became a mirror. Explorers wanted to see their own greatness reflected back. Or perhaps they feared a past more advanced than their present. Either way, the myth grew teeth. By the early 20th century, the idea of Atlantis had merged with everything from Aryan race theories to spiritual utopias. And while we're keeping things PG-13 tonight, let's just say, not everyone used the myth kindly. Atlantis became a kind of Rorschach test. Different people saw different things: a utopia, a warning, a lost homeland, a master race, a paradise punished. But what tied them all together? The Atlantic Ocean itself. Cold, vast, and full of secrets. Oceanographers in the 20th century started mapping the seafloor with sonar. And surprise, surprise, there really is a long ridge running down the middle of the Atlantic. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and it stretches like a spine through the ocean, rising in places to form islands like Iceland and the Azores. Some early researchers speculated, could it be the broken back of a drowned continent? Here's a historical fact you can chew on. Before plate tectonics was widely accepted, geologists had no clear explanation for how continents moved or mountains formed. So theories about sunken lands like Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu were taken more seriously than you might expect. But then science caught up. Plate tectonics offered a better explanation, and the idea of a continent sinking overnight became inconvenient. Yet the ocean still whispers. It has trenches and valleys and ridges we haven't explored. It has anomalies, odd magnetic readings, deep-sea terraces, and seamounts that look just a bit too symmetrical. So here's the soft, salty question. What if some of the clues those explorers followed weren't wrong, just misread? What if Atlantis was never one tidy island, but a scattered memory of many places, each one crumbling, sinking, being swallowed by the tide of forgetfulness? As our ship glides forward into colder waters, remember, the story of Atlantis didn't drown, it adapted. It put on new faces, new coordinates, new meanings. It let us dream of sunken knowledge, of forbidden ruins just beneath the foam. And it's not done with us yet. You're deeper now, far from the soft crash of coastal waves, gliding over black ocean trenches where even sunlight gives up. The water is cold here. Still. But in this vast blue silence, strange things begin to stir. Because now we're slipping into the part of the Atlantis story where ancient memory meets high strangeness, where the lost continent isn't just a cautionary tale or a misunderstood ruin, but maybe something even weirder. Let's talk about maps. Not your crumpled road trip kind, but ancient sea charts drawn when most of the world was still labelled, "Here be monsters." One in particular has caused quite the ruckus, the Piri Reis map. Drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named, you guessed it, Piri Reis, this map supposedly includes parts of the South American coast and what looks suspiciously like an ice-free Antarctica. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and we didn't know what lay under its ice until the 20th century. So how did a 16th century admiral chart its subglacial coastline? Some argue the Antarctica on the map is actually just a distorted South America. Others, especially the fringe crew, believe Piri Reis had access to much older source maps, possibly from lost civilizations. This theory gained steam when Charles Hapgood, a college professor with a passion for shaking up the historical apple cart, proposed that ancient mariners had mapped the world thousands of years ago when the poles were in different places due to a cataclysmic crustal shift. And here's the fringe tidbit of the night. Hapgood claimed that Atlantis may have been located not in the Atlantic but under modern-day Antarctica, frozen over by that very shift. Now let's be clear, this isn't mainstream science. Geologists mostly frown and shake their heads politely, but even Einstein supported Hapgood's general ideas, at least the parts about Earth's crust being able to move rapidly. So we're not in full tinfoil territory, just a cozy aluminum blanket. Maps aren't the only clues. There are stories, persistent little myths that pop up in the oddest places. The Dogon people of Mali, for instance, have long spoken of star beings from Sirius B before modern science even confirmed that such a star existed. The Hopi talk of previous worlds lost to flood. And across Polynesia, legends speak of sunken homelands beneath the Pacific. It's enough to make one wonder, what if Atlantis isn't one place but many stories pointing in a similar direction, like scattered breadcrumbs from a loaf that crumbled long ago? But let's return to the Atlantic for a moment. In the 1960s, researchers from Columbia University were mapping the Atlantic floor when they discovered something strange: terraces, steps, and formations along the mid-Atlantic ridge near the Azores that didn't look entirely natural. Of course, they were dismissed as geological quirks. Yet divers who ventured near these areas have occasionally reported oddities: cobblestone-like patterns, long straight walls, the sense of having found something meant. Cue the open scholarly debate. Are we underestimating the capacity of Ice Age humans, or is there something truly lost beneath our oceans that defies classification? Many experts argue we simply lack enough underwater exploration to draw firm conclusions. Think about it. We've mapped Mars better than we've mapped Earth's seafloor. If we don't know what's down there, how can we rule anything out? You might be thinking, well, if there was a lost civilization that advanced, why don't we find more tech? And that's fair. But consider this sleepy little thought experiment. Our modern world, our cars, phones, satellites, is built mostly of materials like plastic, metal, and glass. Drop all of that into the ocean for 10,000 years and you're not getting back a tech museum. You're getting rust, silt, and a lot of disappointed archaeologists. Even concrete breaks down. The only things that truly last? Stone and mystery. That's why pyramids survive, but circuit boards don't. If an Ice Age civilization had advanced seafaring, stone architecture, or even pre-modern metallurgy, we'd barely find traces after a single cataclysm, especially if it happened near a coast, where sea levels would later swallow all evidence. Now let's sneak into one more curious corner of the Atlantis mystery, one that keeps surfacing like a dream you can't shake. Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet of the early 20th century, gave readings while in trance, during which he claimed that Atlantis was real, technologically advanced, and would eventually rise again. His prophecy? The Hall of Records, Atlantis's great library, would be found under the Sphinx's paw in Egypt. Yep, Egypt. And suddenly we're reminded of another mystery. Why so many ancient cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, built megaliths, pyramids, and temples that align with the stars? Coincidence? Cultural osmosis? Or echoes of a forgotten teacher civilization? Let's be careful not to tumble too far down the rabbit hole tonight. But let's also not pretend we know everything, because one day, a shift in sea currents, a breakthrough in sonar, or a particularly determined submarine nerd might reveal something long buried, and suddenly the myth becomes a footnote in a new chapter of history. So here we are, drifting over ancient sea ridges following impossible maps and wondering if the ocean's hush hides more than we ever guessed. A city swallowed by tides, a people whose name was washed away, or maybe just the echo of a dream too big to fade. You're not alone out here. The waves remember, and maybe, just maybe, so do we. Still drifting, still dream-bound, you begin to feel the water warming, not physically, but through the glow of something familiar rising to meet you. Egypt. Ah yes, the land of sand, stone, and pharaohs, where the pyramids punch into the sky with impossible precision and the Sphinx stares down eternity like it knows your secrets. And here's where the Atlantis current quietly changes direction, pulling us from sunken cities to desert mysteries, all tied together by that timeless human habit, connecting dots that might not belong on the same page, but sure look juicy side by side. Let's take a slow walk past the Nile. It's 4,500 years ago. You're standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, wondering, as we all do, how did they actually build this thing? Mainstream history gives us the basics: quarry workers, ramps, a few decades of backbreaking labor, and a whole lot of motivation from whatever passed for HR in ancient Egypt. That's the official version, and yes, it's backed by evidence. Sort of, enough to make it through a textbook anyway. But what if? Just what if? There's more. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Even the Egyptians themselves said they inherited their knowledge from earlier beings, gods or demigods called the Neteru, who brought wisdom after a cataclysm. Sounds a lot like survivors from, oh, I don't know, maybe a sunken high-tech civilization. Now cue the fringe tidbit. Some researchers, especially in the early 20th century, believed the Sphinx is far older than the pyramids. Geologist Robert Schoch famously proposed that water erosion on the Sphinx's body suggests it was carved thousands of years before the Sahara turned to desert. That puts its origin somewhere around 10,000 BCE, when, wait for it, Plato dated the fall of Atlantis.
Coincidence? Maybe, or maybe we're getting closer.
Enter that cheeky character we teased earlier. Edgar Cayce, America's beloved psychic napper. While in trance, he claimed a lost civilization, yep, Atlantis, seeded Egypt with survivors who helped spark its ancient grandeur. Cayce said the Hall of Records, Atlantis's sacred vault, was buried under the Sphinx's paw, just waiting for the right moment to be discovered. Now, to be clear, no such chamber has been officially found. Yet some ground-penetrating radar surveys around the Sphinx have revealed voids and anomalies beneath the monument. The Egyptian authorities generally dismiss this as natural features, and that's fair. But the timing is suspiciously tidy, isn't it? And here's where the scholarly debate swells again. Did civilizations before Egypt influence its development? Or are we just retrofitting mystery into ruins we don't fully understand? Some Egyptologists say absolutely not. Egypt's evolution was native, organic, and traceable. Others, more fringe-inclined, argue that the sudden sophistication of early dynasties, writing, astronomy, architecture, suggests a deeper source.
And that deeper source? For many, it still smells a lot like Atlantis, even if you're not supposed to say that out loud at archaeological conferences. But hey, let's stir the pot a little more.
Some researchers point to similarities between pyramid structures around the globe, Egypt, of course, but also Mesoamerica, Indonesia, China. Different materials, different cultures, sure, but similar shapes, celestial alignments, and sometimes even step designs. Now, the mainstream take is simple. The pyramid is a naturally efficient structure. Stack stuff tall, it stabilizes. It's practical, not mystical, but the fringe response is, really? That many people, on opposite sides of oceans, all just happened to build cosmic calculators shaped like triangles. At some point, the statistical shrug becomes a little hard to sell. Let's not forget that ancient Egypt had complex star charts and aligned many of its structures with astronomical precision. The Great Pyramid aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. Its internal shafts point toward Orion's belt and Sirius, stars also linked to death, rebirth, and the gods. And guess what? Those are the very stars said to have been sacred in Atlantis mythology, especially in Casey's readings. So what if we're seeing Atlantis not as a place to be found, but as a cultural echo, a blueprint, seeded after disaster, blooming in desert soil? Now picture this. You're walking through the Egyptian desert at twilight. The air's still warm. The stars are blinking awake. The sand shifts softly beneath your feet. You glance up at the Sphinx, and for a split second, you swear it's not a ruin. It's watching, remembering. And that's the real weight of these myths. They're not dead, they're dormant, waiting for someone to notice the fingerprints left behind. Let's also not ignore the architectural overlaps with places like Göbekli Tepe, that prehistoric site in Turkey we'll properly visit later. But even now, just know this, it's full of astronomically aligned megaliths with artistic motifs that echo both Egyptian and Mesopotamian designs, yet it's over 11,000 years old. That's before pottery, before farming. So how does a culture with no civilization build monuments that still confuse us? Either history is wrong, or something else was here first. Something we forgot. Maybe not Atlantis as a city with ziggurats and hoverboards, but Atlantis as a civilization-level reset button, a knowledge dispersal event, a legend scribbled in sand and silt. Remember, Plato didn't just say Atlantis sank. He said it was punished for its arrogance, for forgetting humility. Egypt, on the other hand, enshrined death, rebirth, and the eternal cycle, a spiritual pivot, perhaps, from what came before. So the Nile flows quietly tonight, but it carries whispers of lost empires, buried vaults, and stone faces too ancient to laugh anymore. And if you lean in close, no closer, closer, you might hear what the sand's been trying to say all along. The past isn't gone, it's just asleep, and something is stirring, and something... You're gliding now over unfamiliar terrain, 1 foot in the mythic, 1 foot in the mapped. From the sands of Egypt, we drift eastward, far beyond Nile reveries and star-laced stone, to the wind-swept highlands and fertile valleys of Turkey. Yes, Turkey. Not the first place most people think of when hunting Atlantis, but tonight, we're not following maps, we're following whispers. And these whispers lead straight to Göbekli Tepe. Perched on a hill in southeastern Anatolia, this archaeological marvel lay hidden for over 10,000 years beneath an artificial mound. That's right, someone buried it on purpose. And when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating in the 1990s, what he found rewrote everything. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Göbekli Tepe is the world's oldest known temple complex, dating back to around 9600 BCE. That's thousands of years before Stonehenge, the pyramids, or even basic city-states. This place was built when humanity was still figuring out farming. That's like building a spaceship before discovering the wheel. The pillars, some weighing over 20 tons, are arranged in giant circular enclosures and carved with elegant, surreal animal motifs: lions, scorpions, vultures, snakes. There's symmetry, symbolism, intentional layout. Not just a campsite for hairy hunters, but a blueprint from something deeper. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Despite its scale, Göbekli Tepe shows no signs of being a residential area. No hearths, no homes, just massive ceremonial enclosures on a hilltop. It's as if the spiritual came before the practical, as if belief, or memory, drove people to move mountains. Experts argue, was Göbekli Tepe built by hunter-gatherers using rudimentary tools, or were they guided by remnants of a more advanced, forgotten society? Some archaeologists lean toward the latter. Carefully, of course. Academia is allergic to the word Atlantis, but even the most conservative scholars admit Göbekli Tepe is an enigma. It appeared fully formed, There's no evident evolution. One day it wasn't there, the next, bam, Stone Age super temple. And here's where the Atlantis current circles back in a spiral. The site's dating, 9600 BCE, is eerily aligned with Plato's own dating of Atlantis's demise. If Atlantis was wiped out by a cataclysmic flood or event, could Göbekli Tepe have been a cultural phoenix? A shrine built by survivors trying to preserve knowledge or connect with a lost past? The people who built it knew something. Their carvings include what some researchers interpret as star charts, specifically showing a cometary event that may link to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. That's the idea that around 12,800 years ago, a cosmic impact plunged Earth back into an ice age-like chill, wiping out megafauna, triggering widespread fires, and possibly ending early human civilizations. Not everyone agrees, of course. The debate is ongoing, full of ifs, buts, and eye rolls. But even mainstream geology accepts that something big happened around that time. Glaciers melted fast, sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, entire coastlines vanished. If you were an Ice Age human with a coastal city, poof, Atlantis style. Göbekli Tepe, then, might be a response, a memorial, or maybe, just maybe, a lighthouse for remembering. There's more. Just 30 miles away lies Karahan Tepe, Göbekli's lesser-known sibling, still under excavation. It may prove even older, and it too features massive T-shaped pillars, mysterious sculptures, and signs of deep ritual life. Together, these sites suggest a network, a shared language of stone, hinting at a culture far more complex than the simple hunter-gatherer tag implies. And once you start seeing that pattern, it spreads. Suddenly those myths of great floods and lost ages feel less symbolic and more like cultural trauma. The Bible's Noah, Mesopotamia's Utnapishtim, India's Manu, the Hopis' underground refuges, all remembering a time when the waters came and nothing was ever the same again. Maybe that's what Atlantis really is. A memory shard passed through myth and masonry, not just a city, but a rupture in time. Let's step back, take a breath, and let the Turkish wind brush your cheek. It's dry, soft, but it carries the weight of something old, older than alphabets, older than kings, just stone against sky, carved in defiance of forgetfulness. And remember, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, not destroyed, not abandoned, buried. As if its builders knew their moment would pass, and they needed to preserve it for the dreamers who would come later, for you. So tonight, as the stars blink above Anatolia and shadows stretch across half-buried pillars, ask yourself, who builds monuments that won't be uncovered for 12,000 years? And why? The answers aren't clear, but the questions? They're loud. Loud enough to make the stones whisper? Maybe Atlantis isn't beneath the sea at all.
Maybe it's beneath the sand, beneath our assumptions, waiting patiently in the places we've only just begun to unearth. And you, dear listener, you're part of that rediscovery now, drifting through time on a breeze that smells faintly of dust, jasmine, and secrets.
You're floating now, gently, like a leaf, carried downstream by a current older than memory. From Anatolia's high hills, the scenery softens into a wide, glittering coastline, sun-drenched, salt-laced, and rhythmically lapped by the waves of the Mediterranean. But this isn't a beach vacation. No fruity drinks, no sun loungers. This, dear dreamer, is where theory begins to blur into thunder. Because now we follow the water, specifically the sea levels. Let's talk about the flood. Not the metaphorical one with the big boat and divine warnings, but the real, physical one that swallowed coastlines whole at the end of the last ice age. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Between about 14,000 and 8,000 BCE, the the Earth's ice sheets melted so fast that sea levels rose over 400 feet. That's not a typo. 400 feet. Imagine Miami vanishing, New York City underwater, the English Channel forming. Entire stretches of what is now seafloor were once dry land, habitable, fertile, even idyllic. That includes vast regions of the Mediterranean basin. So picture this. You're standing on a gentle coastal plain in 10,000 BCE, warm breezes fluttering your fur cloak. Behind you, villages, ritual sites, maybe even tall buildings if you want to get spicy. And then the waters rise, first a trickle, then a flood. Not overnight, but not leisurely either. People scramble, stories form. And centuries later, a Greek philosopher named Plato will call it Atlantis. Here's your quirky tidbit. Off the coast of Malta, yes, the sunny diving hotspot, there are what appear to be ancient cart ruts carved into the bedrock, underwater. They run off cliffs, they dip into the sea, and no one knows what made them. Theories range from sledges to alien forklifts, but the kicker, they're possibly over 10,000 years old. That's Ice Age old. More of these mysterious patterns dot the Mediterranean's now submerged shelf, suggesting that whole swathes of land were in use before the sea swallowed them. Could some of these have been part of a once thriving, possibly centralized civilization? It's not impossible. And some even argue Atlantis was not a specific island but a maritime culture, interconnected ports and hubs, dispersed across what is now ocean. And here's where the scholarly debate gets frothy. Is there enough evidence of organized society beneath the Mediterranean to suggest something Atlantean? Or are we simply mistaking natural features and local myths for lost grandeur? The answer depends on who you ask, and how many academic grants they need to protect. But fringe researchers aren't shy. Some point to submerged structures off southern Spain near Doñana National Park, where satellite imagery shows circular patterns beneath the wetlands, eerily like Plato's concentric city design. Spanish archaeologist Dr. Richard Freund proposed that this might be Atlantis. QI rolls from the ivory towers, yet satellite surveys continue. And so do sonar scans off the coasts of Italy, Greece, and Cyprus, uncovering odd geometric shapes, stone walls, and once dry valleys now buried beneath salt water. Some even whisper of submerged pyramids, though those whispers tend to get very quiet when peer review enters the chat. Still, even cautious researchers acknowledge that we've barely explored our underwater heritage. Less than 10% of the Mediterranean seafloor has been thoroughly scanned. That's like trying to understand a book after reading only the first paragraph, while wearing sunglasses in a cave. Now imagine the implications if Plato's Atlantis was destroyed by floods and earthquakes, and if those events lined up with the post-glacial sea rise, then it's not just possible, it's probable that ruins, relics, or even full settlements lie beneath the waves. Not mythical, not magical, just forgotten. Let's not forget the Black Sea flood hypothesis. Around 5600 BCE, the Mediterranean may have surged through the Bosporus Strait, drowning the Black Sea basin in a catastrophic event that some believe inspired flood legends worldwide. That's not just folklore, it's supported by core samples and sediment data. When salt water invades a freshwater lake, it leaves scars. And what do you get from scars? Stories. Some scientists speculate that humans living in those inundated regions passed on tales of a great flood, of vanished lands, of a golden age lost to water. Atlantis may be one of many flood stories, but it's the one that stuck. It's the name we gave the wound, Ave. And here's something curious. Plato described Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined, which sounds exaggerated, until you remember that during the Ice Age, entire continental shelves were exposed. Maybe Atlantis wasn't one island. Maybe it was a vast coastal network. Maybe the island was metaphorical, an isolated way of life cut off by a rising tide. Tonight, as you float over where ancient coastlines once stretched, imagine the forests drowned, the villages lost, the bonfires extinguished by creeping salt. Imagine the people who watched the water rise, unable to stop it, desperately preserving knowledge in stone, myth, and memory. Some fled inland, some perished, and some became legends. And so maybe that's where Atlantis really went. Not into the deep, but into the dream, into the whispering coral and swaying kelp, into every story about what we were and what we might have been. So take a breath, deep and salty. The sea doesn't just hide things, it holds them. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for us to look beneath the surface. And now you sink a little deeper into the soft, blue hush of the Atlantic. No flippers, no air tanks, just curiosity as your anchor. The waves above shimmer faintly, but below is where the silence thickens. Welcome to the sea that shares Atlantis's name, and possibly its secrets. Let's shift westward to the Azores, a volcanic archipelago flung across the mid-Atlantic like crumbs from a Titan's table. These lush green islands sit on the triple junction of 3 tectonic plates. Sounds like just geography, but to Atlantis hunters, that's code for activity, earthquakes, uplift, submersion, boom. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Azores are indeed volcanic and geologically young. They're known to have risen from the ocean via tectonic activity, a classic example of how the Earth's crust can twist and tear, pushing islands skyward or dragging them down. But here's your quirky tidbit. In 2013, Portuguese sailor Diocleciano Silva captured sonar images of a massive, perfectly symmetrical, pyramid-like structure off the coast of São Miguel Island. Roughly 60 meters high, 4-sided, base aligned to cardinal directions. Media pounced, Atlantis theories flared, government response, radio silence, which of course only made people more suspicious. Because if there's one thing conspiracy theorists love more than triangles, it's the quiet. Now, scientists later suggested that Silva's sonar reading was likely a natural underwater hill distorted by scanning error. But still, that didn't stop the buzz. Even today, divers report strange formations beneath Azorian waters, stone blocks, wall-like arrangements, carved platforms. Are these natural lava flows, or the remains of something built? Here's where the debate ripples wide. Is it possible that part of Atlantis, or at least a civilization inspiring it, existed on now submerged Atlantic islands, later destroyed by volcanic upheaval? Or are we, once again, projecting dreams onto coincidence? Some experts roll their eyes, others leave the door just a crack open. But let's rewind back to Plato's original account. He said Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar. So if we take that literally, the Azores are perfectly placed, west of Gibraltar, in the Atlantic, smack in the bullseye of legend, and it gets spookier. Researchers have found submerged structures near the island of Terceira that resemble roads or sea walls. One team even documented a curious cobblestone-like pavement that seems too deliberate to be volcanic. Of course, when they brought this up at conferences, the reception was chilly. Academia prefers its ruins dry and well-behaved. Yet the Azores mythos doesn't stop at sonar. The islands themselves are steeped in local legends, stories of ancient peoples, of sunken cities, of visitors from long ago. Indigenous folklore, though often dismissed, carries odd parallels to the Atlantis tale. Gods angry with hubris, great floods, civilizations lost beneath the sea. You want another strange thread? Okay. In 1971, a professor named Charles Hapgood, yes, the same guy who proposed shifting crust theories, wrote about ancient maps like the Piri Reis, which allegedly show parts of the world as they looked thousands of years ago before the ice melted. These controversial maps depict landmasses that shouldn't have been known to the cartographers of the 16th century, some even pointing to sunken terrain in the Atlantic. Mainstream historians call this coincidence, artistic license, or a misunderstanding of ancient geography. But Hapgood, he believed they were based on even older source maps, possibly created by a seafaring civilization lost to time. Ahem. Atlantis, anyone? And now, as your mind drifts like kelp in the tide, ask yourself, what if we're looking at this backwards? Maybe Atlantis wasn't a single glittering city like some Poseidon-themed Las Vegas. Maybe it was a culture, a way of thinking, a network of port cities, temples, observatories, all connected, all drowned in pieces. That changes everything. Suddenly, a pyramid off the coast of Portugal doesn't need to be the city. It could be an outpost, a ceremonial hub, a way station for sailors navigating magnetic anomalies and celestial paths. Because yes, those exist too. The Azores Triangle, yes, it's a thing, is said to share similarities with the Bermuda Triangle, strange fogs, compass malfunctions, and odd lights. Natural phenomena? Probably. But if you ask enthusiasts, they'll whisper about ancient energy fields, ruins humming in the deep, Atlantean tech gone dormant. Laugh if you want. The ocean doesn't care. It just keeps its secrets cold and quiet. Now imagine standing on a black sand shore, waves licking your ankles looking west. You can't see it, but you feel it, that vast underwater plain. Once land, now sea. Once known, now myth. That's the thing about Atlantis. It might not just be a place, it might be a direction, a longing, a reminder that everything solid can vanish, and everything forgotten can someday rise again. And as you float here, listening to the slow pulse of the deep, a question floats to the surface. What else have we lost to the ocean? And how much of it do we carry still? In stories, in dreams, in the shapes we carve into stone. So next time you look at a map, don't just study what's there, study what's missing. That's where the mystery lives. Now you drift eastward again, this time toward the shimmering, labyrinthine waters of the Mediterranean's western edge, where the island of Crete rises like a jewel against the deep blue. Crete, home of the Minoans, one of Europe's earliest advanced civilizations. Their palaces, art, and maritime prowess dazzle historians and maybe hint at the flickering shadows of Atlantis's legacy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Minoan civilization flourished between roughly 2700 and 1450 BCE, with its peak during the Bronze Age. They built sprawling palatial complexes like Knossos, developed intricate writing systems, linear A and B, and wielded a naval power that dominated much of the Aegean Sea. But here's your quirky tidbit. The Minoans were obsessed with bulls, so much so that bull leaping was a common ritual depicted in frescoes. Some researchers speculate that the bull symbolized power and fertility, but others wonder if the myth of the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature trapped in the labyrinth, was a metaphor for complex social or religious rites. Now, why does Crete matter to Atlantis? Because many scholars propose that Plato's Atlantis story might be a distant echo of the catastrophic destruction of Minoan civilization, triggered by the massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE. This eruption was one of the largest in human history, blasting ash miles into the sky, triggering tsunamis and darkening skies across the Mediterranean. It devastated Minoan settlements and disrupted trade networks, contributing to their decline. Experts debate. Could the Minoans be the Atlanteans Plato described? Was their advanced maritime culture the inspiration for the lost island myth? Some see this as a plausible historical kernel behind the legend, though the timelines don't match Plato's exact dating. Interestingly, the eruption's ash layers have been found as far as Greenland ice cores, proof of its global impact. Yet the Minoans rebuilt and adapted, demonstrating resilience rather than total destruction. Now for the fringe stuff. Some fringe theorists argue that the Minoans had access to advanced technologies. Some suggest crystal power sources or even extraterrestrial contact to explain their architectural achievements and extensive trade networks. While wildly speculative, these ideas capture imaginations and fuel alternative narratives of lost knowledge. Returning to the labyrinth, a curious structure beneath the palace of Knossos has been dubbed the Labyrinth by modern archaeologists. It's a complex network of rooms and corridors, possibly used for storage or ceremonial purposes. The myth, however, lives on, symbolizing the human psyche's twists and turns, or perhaps encoded wisdom from an ancient, forgotten past. Now imagine standing in the shadows of those frescoed walls, smelling faint incense, hearing the soft splash of waves against stone docks. The Minoans knew the sea as both friend and foe. Their trade routes crisscrossed the Mediterranean, connecting distant lands with goods and ideas. But what if the myth of Atlantis isn't just about a city lost to the sea, but a warning about the fragile balance between human ambition and nature's unpredictability? The Minoan eruption was nature's brutal reminder. Still, some argue that Plato's Atlantis was more than a cautionary tale. The detailed descriptions of a powerful naval empire, advanced engineering, and elaborate social structures suggest an idealized memory of a civilization that once challenged the known world. The Minoans' story intertwines beautifully with this narrative, a reminder that history and myth often dance together, sometimes indistinguishable. So as you drift away from Crete's sunlit shores, carrying the scent of olive groves and salt, ponder this. Atlantis may not be just one lost city, but many. Echoes of greatness swallowed by time, sea, and memory. And perhaps, somewhere in the tangled reefs and submerged ruins of the Mediterranean, those echoes still whisper. You drift now into the murkiest currents of the 20th century, where myth and madness collided beneath the banners of history. From sunlit ruins to shadowy camps, the story of Atlantis took a dark turn, invaded by politics, pseudoscience, and human ambition unmoored. In the 1920s and 30s, Germany was a nation searching for roots, identity, and maybe a lost homeland. Here enters the Thule Society, a secretive occult group that flirted with Aryan myths, runes, and the idea of a prehistoric master race. Mainstream fact, the Thule Society provided early members to Hitler's Nazi party, weaving esoteric lore into dangerous ideology. As the Reich grew, its leaders became obsessed with tracing Aryan origins, fueling expeditions that blurred archaeology and fantasy. Imagine you're in a half-lit library in 1938, dust motes dancing like tiny specters, and you've just unrolled a brittle manuscript claiming Atlantis was the cradle of the pure white race. Cue the fringe tidbit. The infamous Ahnenerbe, Heirs Heritage Society, sent teams to Tibet, Scandinavia, and even the Canary Islands, searching for Atlantean artifacts, all blue blood relics and energy crystals to power their new world. Yes, they seriously thought Atlantean technology might save the Reich. You might chuckle, but those scientists had serious funding, and they weren't joking. Experts, scientists, and historians debate how much these expeditions actually found. Most reports vanished, some were conveniently lost in the war's wreckage. But the very notion that a modern army believed in a sunken utopia says volumes about how myth can be weaponized. Imagine tanks rolling over frozen tundra, not for strategic resources, but for a chunk of rock thought to hum with Atlantean power. It's absurd and chilling. After 1945, the horrors of Nazi mysticism sank into infamy, but Atlantis's shadow survived. In the 1960s and 70s, counterculture seekers, copepods on the ocean of consciousness, picked up the torch and transformed Atlantis into a beacon of spiritual awakening. You can almost smell the patchouli as you drift through hippie communes. Mainstream fact: the Theosophical Society, founded in the late 19th century by Madame Blavatsky, had already linked Atlantis to root race theories. But it was the New Agers who really turned up the volume, speaking of crystal grids, chakra alignments, and lost Atlantean mind powers. Here's the fringe tidbit bound to tingle your trance-like senses. In the 1980s, a self-styled guru named Geert Ramper claimed he'd channeled Atlantean elders, transmitting secret vibrations to cure ailments and unlock cosmic DNA. Followers painted their homes in aquamarine, played binaural beats, and waited for telepathic downloads. Many scientists laughed. Skepticism is part of their job description, but some participants swore they felt energy fields pulsing beneath their floors, humming like an electronics store's sales section. Which brings us to the open scholarly debate. Are these modern Atlantean revivals harmless escapism, or do they obscure real history and fuel pseudo-scientific tangles? Some historians warn that blending fact with fantasy robs us of genuine archaeological inquiry. Others suggest that even fringe movements ignite interest, leading people to actual ruins, museums, and research. It's a strange feedback loop, myth-inspiring exploration, creating new myths, and so on. And if you look closely, you'll spot callbacks to our earlier chapters. Remember the satiny ash of Santorini, the buried pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the submerged ruts off Malta? Each of those real-world enigmas became fodder for 20th century dreamers. Nazis seeking weapons, New Agers seeking wisdom, late-night podcasters seeking clicks. Atlantis morphed from cautionary tale into cure-all and crusade. Now, let's drop one more soft joke before you yawn too deeply. What's the difference between a Nazi archaeologist and a New Age crystal healer? One digs up the past for power, and the other claims the crystals do it for free. Tis. Sorry, that one was a groaner. Sleepy ASMR comedians do their best. And another: why don't Atlanteans ever get lost? Because they're always underwater with all the best maps. Okay, last one. If Atlantis was so advanced, why didn't they just build floating cities? Maybe they did, and we'll find them next. Beyond the jokes, though, there's a serious undercurrent. Atlantis' story has been appropriated by ideologies at both extremes, violent and peaceful, oppressive and liberating. Experts caution that when myth becomes dogma, nuance drowns. But scientists and historians also acknowledge that myths hold kernels of collective trauma, memory, and aspiration. They remind us we once, perhaps, lived in a world we barely understand. So here you are, floating between nightmare and daydream, where Nazis chased ghost continents and New Agers channeled ocean spirits. The myth of Atlantis became a mirror, reflecting humanity's highest hopes and darkest obsessions. It's a testament to how a single story, spun by an ancient philosopher, can ripple through millennia, centuries, and movements, forever shifting shape. As your vision blurs and your eyelids droop, remember this: myths are living things. They evolve, adapt, and sometimes get hijacked, but they endure. And Atlantis, myth or memory, persists because it speaks to something fundamental: our fear of losing knowledge, our desire for origins, and our hope that one day we might find what was lost. Far below, the Atlantic's deep pulse thrums on, carrying tales older than empires and newer than any headline. In those quiet depths, the story of Atlantis is both curse and blessing. A reminder that what we forget we must rediscover, and what we claim we must question. So as you drift towards sleep, let these thoughts settle like silt. Atlantis may be myth, but the human heart that embraces myth is very real. And in its dreams lies the seed of tomorrow's discovery. You're gliding now through the cold blue hush of the deep, where sunlight fades, and even the bravest fish wear bioluminescent headlamps. Beneath you, ghostly outlines appear, straight edges, right angles, patterns that don't belong in nature's freehand palette. Welcome to the real club of sunken cities, places that could be Atlantis's shy siblings, blinking in and out of view beneath the waves. First stop, Dwarka. Off India's western coast, near the modern city of the same name, divers have uncovered stone walls, foundation blocks, and streets stretching out into the Arabian Sea. Mainstream historical fact, the Dwarka site dates to around 1500–1300 BCE, based on carbon dating of artifacts and radiometric analyses of coral incrustations, placing it in the late Harappan period. Here was a port of trade, possibly linked to the Indus Valley, where ships carried beads, metals, and stories across vast waters. Now imagine yourself drifting over those rectangular blocks, carved sandstone partially covered by coral, and feeling the pulse of a civilization that once bustled here. Jetties, docks, perhaps marketplaces, now empty corridors haunted by gobies and eels. It's as if Dwarka fell asleep mid-conversation and never woke up. But hold your breath, not literally, you have gear. Because out in the Pacific, near the Ryukyu Islands of Japan, lies the Yonaguni Monument. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver named Kihachiro Arataki, it's a massive formation of terraces, stairs, and what appear to be stone carvings, some blocks over 27 meters long. Quirky tidbit, some enthusiasts claim the steps align with prime numbers or the golden ratio, suggesting intentional design. Others point out that natural tectonic fracturing in sandstone often produces straight lines and flat surfaces. The result? A geometric mystery that military sonar once flagged as potential underwater installations, prompting a few eyebrow-raising naval memos before scholars assured everyone it was probably geology. Further west, off southern Greece, lies Pavlopetri. This submerged city is over 5,000 years old and boasts intact streets, tombs and buildings, complete with courtyards. Researchers have mapped it in detail, and you can almost see the ancient stone rooftops peeking through the water's haze. Mainstream fact, Pavlopetri is the world's oldest submerged city discovered so far, datable to around 2800 BCE, and its layout reveals sophisticated urban planning, including a grid-like street network with drainage channels. Now picture yourself there, drifting between house foundations, tracing the outline of a possible temple or public square. Underwater archaeologists sometimes joke that Pavlopetri is like snorkeling through history class. Just don't let the eels grade your notes. And let's not forget the North American contender, the mysterious formations of the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas. In the 1960s, a man named J.Y. Bimini, farmer, reported a paved road of limestone blocks leading into deeper water. Quirky historians nicknamed it the Road to Atlantis. Some say it's a natural beach rock formation called tessellated pavement. Others think it's the remains of a prehistoric structure. Whatever it is, it's a fine spot to practice your undersea cartography or just wave at passing hogfish. Here's the open scholarly debate that ties them all together. Are these sunken sites glimpses of ancient coastal civilizations swallowed by sea level rise, or are they ordinary geological features dressed up by hopeful eyes? Many marine geologists argue that natural processes, wave action, tectonic shifts, mineral deposition, can create surprisingly architectural shapes. Yet underwater archaeologists counter that when you find pottery shards, tools, or human remains amid these formations, the balance shifts toward human handiwork. By now you've heard that joke. Why did the archaeologist dive into the ocean? To get to the other tide? Cheeky, sure, but there's truth under the pun. Underwater digs demand patience, specialized gear, and often budgets tighter than a wet wetsuit, which means lots of intriguing sites never get fully investigated. They stay in limbo, half fact, half legend. Let's take another quirky example. Beneath the waves off Egypt's Alexandria, archaeologists have found sections of the sunken city of Heracleion, once a major port before the foundation of Alexandria in 331 BCE. Temples, statues of pharaohs, giant sphinxes, now covered in silt. Here's the kicker: Heracleion wasn't myth. It was real, bustling, and then subsided due to earthquakes and rising groundwater sinking into the Mediterranean around the 8th century CE. That city's discovery was textbook confirmation that cities really do drown and sometimes leave spectacular remains. Which brings us back to Atlantis's core, a city said to have vanished beneath earthquakes and floods. If Heracleion can go under, so could entire Bronze Age settlements. And just maybe, those settlements coalesced into legends, merging into a single, grand tale of a utopian island lost to nature's fury. As you drift between Dwarka's docks, Yonaguni's terraces, Pavlopetri's grid, and Bimini's blocks, you begin to notice a pattern. The sea is not just a destroyer, but an archivist, preserving stone while erasing organic matter. Wooden ships rot, paper scrolls dissolve, but quarries and carvings endure, waiting to be read through sonar pings and robot arms. Another soft joke to lull you: what do you call a sunken city that sings? Underwater area. Okay, that one's a bit cheesy, sea cheese. Yet beyond the puns, there's a profound question. If multiple real cities have disappeared underwater, is it so surprising that a story like Atlantis would emerge? That our collective imagination would coalesce these events into a single, mythic memory? Perhaps Atlantis wasn't unique. Perhaps it was the prototype, a synthesis of many lost lands, polished into a timeless narrative. After all, memories blend. Oral traditions pick the brightest shards and discard the rest, creating mosaics of truth and embellishment. So as you allow the currents to carry you past these sunken wonders, think of them as pieces of a greater puzzle. Each is its own mystery, its own snapshot of what we once built, believed, and lost to the tides. The ocean floor is a vast library. Its volumes are written in stone and sediment. And somewhere within those chapters, Atlantis either waits, undiscovered, or lives on through its watery kin.
Either way, the Real Atlantis Club has many members. All you need is breath, curiosity, and a dream of what once was.
You're now floating through time's fog, where Atlantis meets technology. Not the mystic crystals or ancient ships, but satellites and sonar scans beaming down from space, turning the ocean floor into a high-definition map. Welcome to the modern age of underwater archaeology, where cutting-edge tech meets deep human curiosity. Mainstream fact: in the last few decades, advancements in sonar mapping, underwater drones, and submersibles have revolutionized how we explore submerged landscapes. Multi-beam sonar can scan vast areas of seabed, revealing shapes and structures previously hidden in shadow and sediment. Satellite imaging, coupled with LiDAR technology, peeks beneath shallow waters, detecting submerged ruins cloaked by silt and sand. Take, for instance, the 2011 discovery near the Bimini Islands. Using sonar, a series of straight lines and right angles appeared beneath the waves, reigniting debates about Atlantis's location. While skeptics chalked it up to natural limestone formations, the clarity of the images sparked worldwide fascination. Now for a quirky tidbit. In 2018, a team of researchers used a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, to explore the Yonaguni monument more thoroughly. They discovered man-made artifacts like stone tools nearby, suggesting that even if the monument's formation was partly natural, humans had shaped or modified it. It's a perfect example of how technology helps tease apart nature from human handiwork. Though the debate continues, experts, scientists, and historians now grapple with how to interpret this flood of new data. Is the ocean floor revealing a hidden network of ancient cities? Or is our pattern-seeking brain overinterpreting random shapes? It's a classic case of pareidolia underwater, where natural rock formations look like walls or roads, and our minds fill in the blanks. Another modern marvel. Underwater archaeology teams now use DNA analysis on marine sediment to detect traces of ancient human activity, fragments of plant DNA, pollen, even remnants of food. This environmental DNA offers clues about how people lived, what they ate, and how climate changes affected coastal settlements. Picture yourself piloting a submersible, the blue-green light bathing the cabin as you hover over an underwater ruin. The soft hum of thrusters, the glow of screens showing sonar feedback, and the sense of discovery, like being the first eyes on an ancient city in millennia. And here's a soft joke. Why did the archaeologists bring a submarine to the library? Because the best stories are found below the surface. Yeah, I'm still working on my underwater humor. Modern tech isn't just about finding ruins, it's about preserving them. Many submerged sites face threats from fishing trawlers, pollution, and climate change. Researchers use 3D mapping and virtual reality to create digital archives, allowing anyone to explore Atlantis-like sites without ever getting wet. One of the biggest debates among experts is whether we can ever definitively identify Atlantis, or if it will remain a myth cloaked in stone and seaweed. Some think Atlantis is a composite of many real places, others that it's purely allegorical, a story Plato used to discuss ideal societies and hubris. But technology keeps pushing boundaries. There's hope that in the coming years we'll uncover more sites that shed light on ancient maritime cultures. Maybe Atlantis' story will move from legend to a chapter in human history books. So as you let the submarine's gentle vibration lull you, remember that every ping of sonar is a heartbeat in the ocean's memory. Every pixel on the screen a piece of a vast, submerged puzzle. Our quest to find Atlantis is really a quest to understand ourselves, how we live, how we fall, and how we dream. Now you're slipping through the twilight of the mind, where Atlantis drifts into the realm of imagination, philosophy, and what some call esoterica, a blend of history, spirituality, and metaphysical speculation. Here, the lines between fact and fable blur into a shimmering haze, inviting you to wonder what if. Mainstream historical fact. Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, remain the oldest and most detailed accounts of Atlantis, describing a prosperous island civilization that fell out of favor with the gods and sank in a single day and night of misfortune. Scholars debate whether Plato meant this literally or allegorically, using Atlantis as a metaphor to illustrate themes of hubris and ideal governance. Now, to spice things up with a quirky tidbit, various esoteric traditions, from theosophy to New Age mysticism, have adopted Atlantis as a symbol of spiritual awakening and lost wisdom. Some claim Atlanteans were not only technologically advanced, but possessed psychic abilities, lived in harmony with nature, and maintained a profound connection to cosmic energies. Channelers and psychics have reported communicating with Atlantean ascended masters, supposedly guiding humanity from behind the veil. Experts, scientists, and historians remain divided on this spiritual Atlantis. Many see it as a cultural myth, while some scholars suggest these beliefs speak to deeper psychological and archetypal needs, our collective longing for a golden age of innocence and unity. Picture yourself on a quiet beach under a crescent moon, the gentle surf whispering secrets. You close your eyes and imagine Atlantis not just as a place, but as a state of consciousness, a dream of perfection, lost but yearning to be found again. It's less about physical ruins and more about inner awakening. One playful joke for you before your eyelids get heavy. Why did the Atlantean refuse to play cards? Because he was afraid of the deck sinking. All right, I'll stop. Atlantis as myth is a mirror reflecting our hopes and fears. It's a narrative vessel carrying questions about human nature, power, and the consequences of forgetting our roots. Some suggest that Atlantis as a symbol challenges us to build a better world without repeating ancient mistakes. At the same time, this dreamscape attracts charlatans and truth seekers alike. It's easy to get lost in the allure of secret knowledge and lost technologies, sometimes at the expense of critical thinking. Yet the persistence of Atlantis in culture, books, movies, music, even video games, shows how deeply it resonates. The open debate here circles around the role of myth in human culture. Is Atlantis primarily a cautionary tale crafted by Plato, or does it harbor real historical truths veiled in allegory? And even if purely allegorical, why does it continue to inspire scientific exploration and spiritual quests alike? As you float on this calm sea of thought, you might recall earlier moments, the drowned cities, the strange artifacts, the thrill of discovery tangled with speculation. Atlantis lives at the intersection of these threads, woven into the fabric of human curiosity. So as your thoughts begin to slow and settle like sand in gentle tides, consider this. Whether Atlantis ever existed as a physical place or not, its true home may be in the stories we tell, the dreams we chase, and the questions we keep alive. You're gliding now into the soft glow of the present, where past and future fold together like pages in a well-loved book. No grand fanfare, just the gentle pulse of discovery that has carried this story across millennia. Here, at the edge of night's dream, we confront the never-ending search for Atlantis, because like a bedtime tale that refuses to end, the myth keeps resurfacing, inviting you to chase its echo. Remember that fizzing clay jar from our first night, the one half buried in the Aegean silt, whispering of vanished dinners and lost pottery workshops? That same sense of small wonders persists in every new sonar ping, every mud-caked artifact hauled from the deep. It's proof that history is not a monument, it's a living current, carrying shards of the unimaginable to our curious ears. Mainstream historical fact. As of 2025, there have been over 50 dedicated expeditions exploring alleged Atlantis sites, from the Azores to Antarctica, using high-resolution sonar, ROVs, and even autonomous underwater vehicles. These missions have mapped thousands of square kilometers of seabed, revealing more anomalies than we can neatly classify. Each odd formation, each grid-like shadow, rekindles the hope that somewhere beneath waves lies a fragment of truth about Plato's lost world. Yet hope alone doesn't build a civilization. So we keep chasing maps, ancient charts like the Piri Reis and Orontes Phineus, modern reconstructions based on LiDAR and satellite data, trying to reconcile coastline shifts of 400 feet with Plato's coordinates. Fringe researchers argue that secret Vatican archives hold unpublished navigational logs, while TikTok Atlantis hunters claim they've found the Hall of Records using drone-mounted magnetometers. Quirky tidbit: one viral account alleges a 20-second clip of a glowing structure under the ice shelves of Antarctica, an Atlantean power core, no less, though experts, scientists, and historians have largely dismissed it as a polar mirage. Still, the search endures, fueled by a blend of academic rigor and restless imagination. Universities have begun offering underwater archaeology courses, funding grants for environmental DNA studies in ancient coastal zones, and convening symposiums where geologists and classicists collaborate on modeling early sea level changes. These interdisciplinary efforts are our best chance to sift silt from significance to decide whether a linear trench is a natural fault or a forgotten dock. And of course, there's the human side of this quest. Graduate students labor for years piecing together ceramic shards. Veteran divers spend their careers in wetsuits chasing sonar blips. Amateur enthusiasts spend weekends teaching themselves to read bathymetric charts. The flame of curiosity that burned in Plato's dialogues now flickers in each of them, an unwillingness to let the story lie. Yet the open scholarly debate remains. Is Atlantis a concrete archaeological goal, or is it an idealized waypoint on our intellectual journey? Some argue that by searching for Atlantis, we continually uncover real, valuable history. Submerged Harappan ports, Bronze Age trade hubs, Neolithic shrines like Göbekli Tepe. Others warn that Atlantis is a seductive false idol, leading researchers to overinterpret coincidences, to chase shadows at the expense of more plausible discoveries. You feel the weight of that question as you drift above an abyssal plain, gazing at the glow of ROV lights slicing through the dark. The current is gentle, but it carries whispers of everything we've learned. The Minoan volcanoes, the Egyptian water erosion on the Sphinx, the buried circles off Malta, and the silent stones of Pavlopetri. Each is a fragment, a prelude to something bigger, or perhaps the only thing that ever was. Those divers in the Azores, scanning ridges with their submersibles, aren't just hunting for Atlantis, they're chasing a feeling, that dizzy thrill of touching the past in a world that rarely stops turning. Every discovery bends our understanding, reshapes the coastline of our beliefs, and reminds us that what we call myth may be memory disguised by time. So you drift, and you wonder, what if Atlantis isn't one location at all, but a constellation of lost places, each a node in a network of human experience scattered by floods, fires, and faults? What if the myth survives because it isn't about coordinates, but about the perennial cycle of rise and ruin, of remembering and forgetting? It's a comforting thought, like the hush before dawn. Atlantis may not be waiting under a single turquoise sea, but in every whisper of submerged city, in every flicker of sonar, in every hypothesis that refuses to settle. The search never truly ends, because as long as we seek, we learn. And as long as we learn, we carry Atlantis in our curiosity, in our hope, and in the stories we pass on. So let your mind drift with the ocean's pulse, knowing that the myth you chase tonight is bigger than any one place. It's the ongoing conversation between what we know and what we dare to imagine. It's the silent promise that even in the deepest dark, something waits to be discovered. Now the tide of our tales slows, and the world softens into muted hues. We've voyaged from Plato's candlelit dialogues to cutting-edge sonar scans, from volcanic cataclysms to star-touched temples. Each chapter a gentle wave lapping the shores of your mind. Let each memory linger, lengthening into the quiet spaces between thoughts, like embers that glow just before they fade. In these final moments, breathe deeply. Feel the rhythm of your own pulse as strong and steady as the ocean's, a reminder that you too are part of this vast story. The questions we've uncovered about lost cities, ancient powers, and the shape of human hope rest now like smooth stones in your hand. No hurry to turn them over, no need to solve every mystery before sleep finds you. Experts, scientists, and historians will continue to debate. Satellite images will remain pixelated puzzles. Divers' lights will still carve trails through the deep blue. But whether Atlantis lies beneath waves, beneath sand, or within the collective dreaming of humanity, its essence endures. A cautionary whisper about hubris, a spark of wonder at what once was, and a beckoning promise of what might still be. So drift on this gentle current, letting each thought dissolve like salt in water. Embrace the soft hush of possibility. Let the stories we've shared slip into your dreams, where time melts and the past and future dance together. Good night, traveler of tides and tales. May your sleep be deep, your dreams vivid, and your curiosity forever awake.